Big breaking news coming in here on NDTV. A big setback for US President Donald Trump, with the US Supreme Court striking down President Trump's tariffs. That's right, you heard that right. The US top court, the Supreme Court, has struck down all of President Donald Trump's tariffs that are currently active on countries across the world, including India. Remember, India's tariffs, the US tariffs on India were recently reduced as part of the Indo-US trade deal framework from 50% to 18%. That goes away as well. The US Supreme Court has ruled that Trump has no power to impose those tariffs, and if he wants to impose tariffs, he needs to get it cleared from the US Congress, and therefore the existing tariffs, including the 18% on India, become null and void. We're still analyzing the implications of this ruling from the US Supreme Court, especially in the wake of the thaw in relations between India and the United States and the Indo-US trade deal. But if this is binding, and it is because this is the US Supreme Court, then technically the 18% tariffs that India still has imposed upon it from the United States becomes a thing of the past and is no longer applicable on India. This is in effect the US Supreme Court striking down existing tariffs that Trump has imposed on all countries, and has also said that Trump has no power to impose those tariffs. NDTV's Aditya Raj Kaul is live with me. Aditya, huge ruling coming in from the US Supreme Court on existing tariffs and Trump's power to impose them.
Well, Shiv, we are breaking this first on NDTV. Just moments ago, the US Supreme Court has given a historic verdict claiming that this entire, tariff policy, the global tariff policy by the Trump administration, is illegal. It is a big setback coming into the Trump administration, something that they had expected. They were, in fact, giving some murmurs that this could happen because they knew that this could not stand the scrutiny of the law. It's a big relief coming in, not just for India, but a lot of other countries where there were huge tariffs that were imposed. In fact, a lot of countries also questioning the tariff policy, the economic repercussions that it had over the last 10 months. For India, it was up to 50% recently, but after the intent of a trade agreement, it was reduced to 18%. We are getting more details. The entire verdict is 170 pages long, and we will go through the mighty details of it. But as of now, the Trump policy of global tariffs has been struck down. It is illegal. That is what the US Supreme Court is saying. There will be thick reactions coming in. Trump will not be happy with it, Shiv, as we know. There might be reaction to it, but we'll wait and watch how things unfold. Last time I remember, Trump had said that if the Supreme Court strikes down the policy, it will be a huge impact to the US because a lot of money will go out, which has been taken as tariff in the last few months.
That's right. And Aditya, we've heard President Trump talk about how the many billions of dollars that have been flowing into the US economy as a result of these tariffs that have been imposed on many countries. I want to ask you specifically as far as India is concerned, because this is particularly important to us, the details of how this will be binding and what the implications are, Aditya, because as you've been covering the recent defreeze of relations between India and the US, the arrival at a framework trade agreement between the two sides, the reduction in the active tariff from 15 to 18% has been seen as a big improvement. This could potentially mean that 18 becomes zero.
Well, it could potentially mean it becomes zero, but what I would guess at this particular stage, I don't think India will react sharply to any kind of a Supreme Court internal, legal mechanism that is underway in the United States. What India will amicably do is be on the diplomatic table, continue with the diplomatic dialogue that is underway, be it with the chief negotiator, Darpan Jain, who is in United States right now, who is negotiating with his US counterparts from the, Department of Commerce, and that negotiation will continue. Remember, both the US and the Indian side this morning, while actually declaring the Pax Silica and having India as part of it, had said that the negotiations are underway. This week also they are having negotiations both in Delhi and Washington DC. And now they are waiting for the so-called deadline of March, mid-March, where the trade agreement will be there. But certainly a major relief coming in right now for India and for a lot of other countries where tariffs were there, potentially 0% tariff. But we'll have to go to the technical details of the verdict right now. As of now, it has been struck down. It's illegal. It cannot be implemented by the Trump administration.
Yeah.
But will there be any kind of an executive order? Will there be some kind of navigating this legal hurdle? We'll have to wait and watch.
Hugely important, and I think what you've said is precisely the point, Aditya. The Indian government is unlikely to react. This is an internal verdict of the Supreme Court in the United States, and even though it impacts India directly, India, of course, will be playing this carefully. After all, this is Donald Trump, and nobody can second guess what may happen, even if it has to do with the Supreme Court. Vishnu Shom, also live with me, has been tracking this very closely, the entire journey of these tariffs. Vishnu, your first impressions? Big, sharp, very unmistakable verdict from the Supreme Court.
This is a huge step which puts a pause on Trump's style of functioning and sort of sets a precedent on the rule of law and sets a signal to the administration of the US president that, he cannot force, or the system cannot force its way to do exactly what they want. Any decision has to be based on law. That said, if the Trump administration decides to push through, they do have a couple of legal options which are available to them, but as I understand it, these are cumbersome efforts which the government of the US would need to do. There's Section 301 and 232. These allow for tariffs based on unfair trade practices or national security, but these require a longer investigation period and specific justifications. There's also Section 122, which is a 1974 law that allows the president to impose temporary tariffs to deal with trade imbalances, but these would eventually need congressional approval. But I think the key question that now needs to be asked is, with this now being made illegal by the US Supreme Court, approximately $90 billion to $140 billion in tariff revenue collected since 2025 could be eligible for refunds to the businesses and the importers who paid them.
Yeah.
Now, that would be a staggering blow economically to the United States.
Vishnu, stay with me. Nick Harper, senior journalist, joins us live tonight from Washington, D.C. Nick, welcome. Could you take us through the implications of this big, pretty well-defined verdict from the Supreme Court? What does it do to the existing tariffs that the Trump administration has imposed on other countries? Nick.
Well, look, absolutely enormous implications here for the White House, for the Trump administration. These tariffs were really a central economic plank of the whole trade policy agenda that the US president had been laying out during the last 12 months since he returned to office. I'm outside the Supreme Court, where that ruling has just come down 6-3 against him from the 9 justices. What it now potentially means, as we've been hearing, is the White House, the Trump administration, will be liable for hundreds of billions of dollars in refunds, largely to American consumers and companies, because they have borne the brunt of these higher costs. About 95% of all increased costs, as expected over the last year, have been passed on to Americans, and they now have the ability to file for refunds from the Trump administration. So this is certainly not the result that the US president was hoping for, bearing in mind how much stock he has placed in these tariffs. But just to define exactly what this will mean, many tariffs that he's put in place will remain. For example, sector-specific tariffs on things like aluminium, steel, cars, pharmaceuticals. Those will remain. What we will see here is those Liberation Day tariffs announced last April against every country around the world, tariffs that were set at differing rates for differing countries. those are the tariffs that have now been ruled illegal. And I think what we will probably see, as well as this fight for the refunds, is the White House trying to find some sort of way to redefine how they impose these import duties on other countries, because they are unlikely to want to drop them without a fight. And it may well be that they can find another way to impose tariffs using some sort of other powers that have not yet been ruled illegal by the Supreme Court.
Nick, does this ruling come into effect immediately? How does it work with the US Supreme Court? Does the Trump administration need to adhere and execute what the Supreme Court has said, immediately? Is there a time frame? How does it work?
Well, we're waiting for the exact details on all of this. Much of that will be within the ruling itself. But normally this would mean that what the Supreme Court says is the rule of law for the entire country from that moment onwards. And in theory, therefore, the Trump administration, as we head into this weekend, will be scrambling, trying to work out what comes next, how to adhere to this new policy, this new ruling from the Supreme Court, but also potentially how to get around it and what sort of response there will be. Donald Trump himself is at the White House this morning. He is meeting with governors from the 50 states across America. This ruling coming at a time when he is speaking not just to Republican governors but Democrat governors as well, many of whom have been against these tariffs and have been calling out the White House for the last year, saying that they have heard from constituents within their own state who have felt that they have been unfairly punished by the US president, having to pay higher costs if they're a company or simply if they are a consumer buying stuff from supermarket shelves, from big box stores across their state. They have seen the cost of living increase as a result of these tariffs. And just one other thought, just to bear in mind, we are in the midterm year. It means that in November there will be the midterm elections, essentially a referendum on the president, although he himself is not on the ballot. And it will be an opportunity for voters to give their thoughts on this tariff policy, many of whom have been very disgruntled about the higher costs over the last year, at a time when inflation was already raised, something that the US president has been trying to battle, especially with the messaging, saying that he has been trying to get those rising prices under control and has been, in his words, he feels, able to do so during his first year of his second term.